Detective Valerie Stone had never believed in coincidence. 20 years on the force had taught her that coincidence was only an illusion that hid a pattern. The morning sun was mercilessly illuminating the upscale Oak Grove neighborhood, turning the manicured lawns and luxurious facades into the setting for another tragedy. Through the open window of the police car, Valerie could smell the tangy aroma of freshly cut grass, strangely dissonant with the purpose of her visit. Preliminary reports indicate a double homicide, Denver's patrol officer said dryly as he met her at the police fence. A neighbor discovered the bodies around 6 a.m. when she came to borrow sugar. A neighbor borrowing sugar at 6 in the morning? Valerie raised an eyebrow. Baking something for the relative's arrival. The officer shrugged. She said the door was ajar. She called out to the landlady, but no one answered. Then she went inside. The two-story red brick mansion looked like it came off the pages of a luxury real estate magazine. Exquisite landscaping, immaculate lawn, antique statuettes in the niches of the facade. Everything spoke of wealth and taste of the mistress. Diane Blackwell, 49, successful realtor, single, no children, Denver continued, checking his notebook. The second deceased was her nephew, Adam Blackwell, 18, a freshman at the local university. Valerie nodded, pulling on her latex gloves. The living room she entered, accompanied by the CSIs, breathed luxury. Antique furniture, heavy framed paintings, stained glass windows. The contrast between the exquisite interior and the brown stains on the Persian rug was stark. Diana Blackwell's body lay on the couch as if she'd just dozed off. If it weren't for the purple bruises on her neck and the horror in her eyes, you'd think she was just resting after a hard day's work. Asphyxiation, said the medical examiner examining the body. Presumably smothered with a pillow. Time of death was between 9 and 11 p.m. Valerie nodded and shifted her gaze to the second body. Adam Blackwell was lying on the floor at the foot of a vintage table. The young man's formerly handsome face was contorted in a grimace of misery, his blonde hair slicked back from the blood seeping from a massive wound at the back of his head. "And here is blunt trauma," stated the expert. Judging from the nature of the wound, he'd been hit with something heavy. Perhaps this one. He pointed to the missing statuette, the trace of which was visible on the dust-covered surface of the table. Valerie walked slowly around the room, noting the signs of the struggle, the overturned chair, the broken vase, the scattered photographs. A cracked family picture frame lying on the floor caught her attention. "Looks like a crime of passion," one of the CSIs said, carefully picking up the shards of glass. Nothing was stolen. The safe in the bedroom was untouched. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Valerie said, sitting down to examine the photograph. It showed 5 people smiling, a middle-aged man and woman, a young girl, Diana herself, and presumably Adam, then a teenager. "The victim's family is on their way," Denver reported, peering into the living room. Miss Blackwell's brother, his wife and daughter. Valerie stood up, feeling the familiar heaviness that always accompanied the start of a complex investigation. On the back of the photograph, she noticed the inscription, "Christmas, 2022nd year. Diana, Thomas, Emily, Olivia, Adam." A list of names that hid someone's secrets and possibly a motive for murder. 30 minutes later, an elegant sedan parked in front of the house. Thomas Blackwell appeared to be a tall man with a commanding face and a cold stare. His strict business suit emphasized his professional status as a successful lawyer. His wife Emily, a petite woman with impeccably styled blonde hair, seemed inappropriately fragile next to her husband. Olivia Blackwell, a slender girl with an intense gaze, had clearly inherited her father's features, the same strong-willed chin and straight nose. "You must be mistaken," Thomas muttered when the patrolman told him what had happened. "It just can't be." "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell," Valerie said softly as she stepped out to meet them. "I'm Detective Valerie Stone, in charge of this case. We're going to need your help with identification." Valerie watched their reactions. Thomas seemed composed, but his pale lips betrayed his inner turmoil. Emily cried silently, holding a handkerchief to her face. Olivia stood motionless, her gaze fixed on nothing. After the formal identification, Valerie invited the family into the next room for the initial interview. She had deliberately chosen Diana's small office, where the cramped surroundings offered no escape from the detective's observant gaze. "When was the last time you saw Diane and Adam?" Valerie asked, opening her notebook. "I spoke to my sister the day before yesterday," Thomas answered, adjusting his tie. "Just a normal phone conversation, nothing special." "And Adam? Did you know he was here?" "He visited his aunt often," Emily interjected, her voice sounding broken. They'd always been close. Diana. She was like a second mother to him. Something in her tone caught Valerie's attention. Barely perceptible bitterness, jealousy. "Adam said he'd stop by his aunt's house after school," Emily continued. "It was routine. And you?" Valerie turned to Olivia. "Did you visit your aunt often too?" The girl shrugged. "Not as often as Adam. I have school, friends," she stammered. Aunt Diana and Adam had been especially close the last couple of years. "Especially close?" Valerie interjected. "What do you mean?" Olivia cast a quick glance at her parents. "They just spent a lot of time together. Aunt Diana helped him with his enrollment, then with his studies. They went to the theater, to exhibitions." The girl hesitated. Sometimes it seemed a little strange. "Olivia," Thomas said sharply. "What exactly did seem strange?" Valerie insisted. "It was just, they were too close. Like they shared secrets," Olivia replied quietly. "Adam had changed since he'd gone to university. More withdrawn, less in touch with us." Valerie made a note in her notebook. "Where were you all last night between 9 and 11? "I was at a business dinner with clients," Thomas answered immediately. "At the Aquamarine restaurant. I can provide you with the names of everyone who attended." "I was at a charity event for the Children's Hospital," Emily said. "There were a lot of people there, everyone can confirm." Valerie noted that Emily was nervously rubbing the sleeve of her blouse. Despite the hot day, she was wearing long-sleeved clothes. "What time did the event end?" 8:30, no, 9, Emily hesitated. "I don't remember exactly. Then I stopped at the drugstore and came home." "What drugstore?" "At the intersection of Oak and Maple." "They close at 9, Valerie said. "So I was there until 9, Emily corrected herself quickly. "And then I went home." "And what time were you home?" About 10, Emily looked away. "The road was busy." "It's a 10-minute drive from the pharmacy to your house," Valerie noted. "Yeah, I stopped at the grocery store," Emily mumbled. I stood in traffic for a while." Valerie made another note. The hour Emily couldn't explain fell right around the time of the murder. "And you, Miss Blackwell?" She turned to Olivia. "I was in the student library until closing time, 10 p.m. Then I went to my dorm. My roommate can confirm." Valerie nodded, completing the recording. Suddenly, the medical examiner peered into the room, his face expressing concern. "Detective Stone, can I talk to you for a minute?" Excusing herself, Valerie left the room. "What do you got?" "We found documents in the dead man's bedroom," the examiner said quietly. Medical results. Adam Blackwell was recently tested for HIV. Positive, dated last week. Valerie felt something click inside, the first piece of the puzzle falling into place. "Make a copy of the paperwork and check the victims' cell phones," she ordered. "I need all the medical records for both victims." Back with the family, Valerie noticed that the atmosphere in the room had changed. Thomas was saying something quietly and tensely to his wife, who was shaking her head negatively. Olivia sat with her arms wrapped around herself as if she was cold. "Was something wrong?" Valerie asked. "No, nothing," Thomas answered quickly. "It's just that this whole thing is too hard for us." Valerie shifted her gaze back to Emily. There was something about her posture, her shoulders tense, her fingers clenched to the point of white knuckles that said she was under a great deal of stress. She noticed another oddity. There was a fresh scratch on Emily's wrist, which she tried to hide with her sleeve. "Mrs. Blackwell? Are you hurt?" Emily flinched and hurriedly pulled back her sleeve. "This? I scratched myself yesterday when I was working in the garden." She smiled nervously. "I have new rose bushes and they're so prickly." "I understand," Valerie nodded. "I have one last question. Do you know if Diana or Adam had any enemies? Maybe some unpleasant situations lately?" Thomas and Emily looked at each other. "Diana was a successful realtor," Thomas said slowly. "There are always dissatisfied clients in her line of work. But enemies? No, I don't think so. And Adam? A regular student, Thomas shrugged. Smart kid, did well in school, played sports. He seemed restless, Olivia said suddenly. I called him a couple days ago and he was weird. He said his life was ruined, but he wouldn't explain why. Valerie noticed Emily flinch at those words. You didn't ask him what he meant? I did, of course, Olivia shrugged, but he said he couldn't talk about it. I thought maybe it was a problem with school or a girlfriend. After completing the interview, Valerie escorted the family out and returned to the crime scene. The forensics team was finishing collecting evidence, photographing every inch of the living room. Anything interesting? She asked the team leader. Lots of prints, but mostly victims and family members, he replied. Found a few hairs that didn't belong to the victims, sent them for analysis. And one more oddity, he pointed to the tea table. 2 cups of tea, but one had traces of lipstick on it, and the other had some powder residue. Sent it to the lab. Powder? A drug? Could be. We'll let you know the results. Valerie nodded thoughtfully and went upstairs to Diana's bedroom. The spacious, pastel-colored room looked immaculate. A large bed with a silk bedspread, an elegant dressing table, bookshelves. She opened the walk-in closet. Dozens of designer outfits, shoes, bags, the life of a successful, well-to-do woman. On the bedside table was a small photograph in a silver frame. Young Adam in his graduation suit, smiling, with genuine joy in his eyes. Next to it lay a book with a bookmark and an orange plastic jar of pills. Valerie put on a glove and picked up the jar, an antiretroviral drug prescribed for HIV infection. The second piece of the puzzle fell into place. Riverview Medical Center was buried in greenery and housed in an old colonial-style building. Valerie Stone parked the car and leisurely looked around the grounds. The clinic catered to the wealthy clients of the western suburbs, Diane Blackwell among them. At the front desk, Valerie showed her ID. I need to speak to Dr. James Coleman. The receptionist gave the detective an attentive look. I'm afraid you'll have to wait. Dr. Coleman is with a patient right now. It took 40 minutes, just long enough to demonstrate who was in charge. Valerie patiently flipped through glossy magazines, occasionally glancing at her watch. Finally, she was invited into the office. Dr. Coleman was a tall man of about 55, with a neat gray beard and attentive eyes behind stylish glasses. Detective Stone, he held out his hand. I heard about the tragedy. Terrible. Were you Diane Blackwell's attending physician? Valerie got right to the point. Coleman gestured for her to sit down, then lowered himself into a chair behind the solid oak desk. That's right. More than 15 years. And yes, I've also been watching the entire Blackwell family. He interlocked his fingers. But I'm afraid I can't discuss medical details. Doctor-patient confidentiality, you understand? Valerie pulled an official document from the folder. This is a warrant to access Diane and Adam Blackwell's medical records. A double murder investigation takes priority over confidentiality. Coleman took the paper and studied it carefully, then sighed heavily. I understand. What exactly are you interested in? To start with, we found antiretroviral drugs in Diana's bedroom. Valerie watched his reaction. And Adam's positive HIV test from last week. The doctor's face remained unperturbed, but his fingers trembled slightly. Yes, Diana was HIV positive, diagnosed 3 years ago. She was compliant with her treatment regimen, tested regularly. Her condition was stable. How did she get infected? Presumably through sexual contact. Diana was unmarried but had an active personal life. She didn't want to discuss details. And Adam? The doctor rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was a shock. The positive results came back 8 days ago. I told him personally. How did he react? Like any 18-year-old. First denial, then anger, despair. He demanded an explanation as to how this was possible. Did he know who he might have contracted it from? Coleman was silent, as if weighing his words. Not initially, no. He claimed he was very careful about the few relationships he had. But when I started asking questions, trying to establish the source, the doctor stopped talking. What happened? He suddenly turned pale and said he had to go, ran out of the office. I tried to contact him later, but no luck. Valerie made a note in her notebook. Are you suggesting that he guessed the source of the infection? That's just my guess, Coleman answered cautiously, but his reaction was too strong to think otherwise. Did Diana know about his diagnosis? Not from me, but they were close. Perhaps he told her himself. Valerie nodded, mentally constructing a chain of events. If Adam realized he'd been infected by his own aunt, with whom he'd had a relationship, that could be a motive for murder. But then who killed him? Tell me more about the Blackwell family, she asked. What was the relationship between Diana and her brother? On the surface, good. Thomas is a successful lawyer, always keeping his emotions under control. But I know there were differences between them. Diana was more free-spirited and Thomas was conservative. And Emily Blackwell? What was her relationship with Diana like? The doctor frowned slightly. Complicated. They rarely clashed openly, but the tension was always palpable. Emily is a perfectionist, very concerned with the family's reputation, and Diana lived by her own rules. Emily works for a pharmaceutical company, right? Yes, in the research department at Nexus Pharma. She's a biochemist specializing in psychotropic drugs. Valerie made another note. Does she have access to potent sedatives? Coleman raised his eyebrows in surprise. Theoretically, yes. Their lab is developing drugs to treat anxiety disorders. But why do you want that information? Just checking out the possibilities, Valerie said evasively. One more question. Has Emily Blackwell asked you recently about the effects of sedatives? The doctor hesitated, his gaze becoming wary. Yes, there was a consultation. About 2 weeks ago. She said she was having trouble sleeping. Did you write her a prescription? No. She said she'd think about it and come back. But she never did. After leaving the clinic, Valerie called the station and requested a search warrant for Emily Blackwell's computer. With each new fact, Emily looked more and more suspicious. The next point was Adam's apartment, a small studio not far from the university standard student housing. A minimum of furniture, textbooks, scattered clothes on the wall, photos of friends, among which Valerie noticed, and pictures with Diana. Nothing explicit, just an aunt and nephew against a background of sights at some cultural event. In her desk drawer, Valerie found a leather notebook. She put on her gloves and carefully flipped through the pages. Mostly there were study notes, graphs, sketches of some project. But a few pages at the end caught her eye. Personal notes dated within the last few months. September the 20th. She says it's crazy, but isn't love always crazy? I never thought it was possible, but next to her I feel alive, real. She understands me like no one else. Yes, there's an age difference between us, but who cares? We're adults. October the 5th. My mom asked me today why I was at D so often. I had to lie about extra classes and studying for exams. I hate lying, but they wouldn't understand. No one would. It's our secret, and I like to keep it. November the 2nd. Dee was especially beautiful today. Sometimes I don't believe my luck. She says we must be careful, but at the same time she is drawn to risk. We almost got caught yesterday. O almost walked in without knocking. We need to be more careful. Valerie closed the notebook. She now had a certainty. There was a romantic relationship between Adam and Diane, but she still didn't understand who could have killed them both. The next step was to interview Olivia Blackwell again. Valerie met her at a coffee shop near the university campus. She looked gaunt, dark circles under her eyes. Thank you for meeting me. Valerie ordered 2 cups of coffee. I have more questions. Olivia nodded, nervously twirling her napkin in her hands. In our last conversation, you mentioned that the relationship between your brother and your aunt seemed strange. What exactly did you mean by that? The girl was silent for a long time, as if gathering her thoughts. I didn't want to talk about it in front of my parents, she said at last. But a few months ago, I accidentally saw messages on Adam's cell phone. What kind of messages? From Aunt Diana. They were, intimate. Olivia's cheeks flushed slightly. I couldn't believe my eyes. It seemed disgusting. She was twice his age, his own aunt. Did you ask your brother about it? Yes, we had a big fight. He denied it at first, and then he said, I didn't understand that it was true love. Olivia grinned bitterly. Can you believe it? He really believed it. Said they were happy together and weren't hurting anyone. Did you tell your parents? No. He begged me not to. Said if I blabbed, he'd never speak to me again. I loved my brother no matter what, so I decided to keep it a secret, hoping it would just go away. And have you noticed any changes in Adam's behavior lately? Yeah, about a week ago he started acting out. He'd call me in the middle of the night, rambling on about how his life was over, how he could never be normal. I thought he and Aunt Diane had broken up, and he was going through a breakup. Valerie listened intently, mentally noting the coincidence of the timing with the HIV test results. Had he mentioned anything about his health? Olivia shook her head, but then stopped. Not directly, but he'd said a phrase that now made sense. She poisoned me, Olive. Literally poisoned me. After her meeting with Olivia, Valerie returned to Diane's house. The forensics team had already finished their work, but she wanted to take another look at the crime scene, now aware of the romantic connection between the victims. Diana's bedroom looked immaculate, expensive linens, elegant furniture, artwork on the walls. Valerie methodically looked around the room, searching for signs of Adam's presence. In the drawer of her bedside table, she found a man's wristband, too youthful for Thomas, but quite Adam-esque. Checking the closet, behind a stack of towels, Valerie found a small box. Inside were letters and photographs. The handwritten letters were signed simply, "Your A." The content left no doubt about the nature of the relationship, passionate declarations of love, plans for a future together. The photographs were even more explicit, Diana and Adam together, in an unequivocal embrace. Some showed them on an exotic beach, apparently on a secret vacation. So much for motive, Valerie thought. If Thomas or Emily found out about the affair and that Diana had infected their son, that could be enough for murder. She called the station to get the results of the substance analyzed from the cup. A powerful sleeping pill, the technician reported. 5 times the therapeutic dose, enough to induce deep sleep or even unconsciousness. The drug is available by prescription? Yes, but it's not a common sleeping pill. It's used in specific cases, such as severe anxiety disorders. Exactly the kind of drugs Emily studies in her lab, Valerie pointed out. The next step was a visit to Thomas Blackwell. She caught him in the spacious office of a downtown law firm. Thomas looked exhausted, but held his dignity. "Detective Stone, what can I do for you?" "Mr. Blackwell, I need to ask you a few questions about your sister." Valerie sat down across from him. "Were you aware of her medical condition?" Thomas froze, his face impenetrable. "I don't know what you mean." "Her HIV status," Valerie said bluntly. After a long pause, Thomas nodded. "Yes, I knew. Diana informed me after receiving the diagnosis. We agreed to keep it between us." "Why the secrecy?" "Are you joking?" Thomas chuckled bitterly. "Despite all the progress, this diagnosis is still stigmatizing. Diana was a successful realtor, working with an elite clientele. She was afraid if the truth came out, it would ruin her career." "You didn't tell your wife?" "No." Thomas looked away. "Emily, she's very concerned about social status. She believes that any problems must be hidden in order to maintain the perfect image of the family. I've decided to spare her that information." "Now, Mr. Blackwell, a more difficult question." Valerie stepped forward. "Were you aware of the relationship between your sister and your son?" Thomas jumped up, his face contorted with anger. "What are you saying? This is absurd." "I have proof," Valerie replied calmly. "Letters, photographs, Olivia's testimony, Adam's diary. They had an affair, and it was probably from her that he contracted HIV." Thomas clenched his fists, but then slowly sank back into his chair. He looked broken. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "God, I didn't know anything. It's impossible. Diana couldn't... with my son." "When did you find out about Adam's diagnosis?" 2 days ago." Thomas ran his hand over his face. "He came to my office looking terrible. Said he had something to tell me, but he couldn't. In the end, he just handed me the test result. I was shocked. I asked how it was possible, who could have infected him. He burst into tears and ran away." "Did you contact your sister after that?" "Yes, the same day. Called her, asked if she knew about Adam's condition. She said she did and asked me to give her time to talk to him. I was so confused. I couldn't believe that my son..." Thomas's voice trembled. "I didn't connect those things. I didn't want to." "Did you tell your wife?" "No. I decided to wait until I knew what was going on. Emily idolizes Adam so much, it would break her heart. But something in Thomas's tone made Valerie doubt his last words. Leaving the office, Valerie went to the police technical department, where experts were analyzing the digital data from Emily Blackwell's computer. "What do you got?" The technician turned the screen toward her. "Look at the search history for the last 2 weeks, the effects of sleeping pills on the body, how to determine HIV without testing, involuntary manslaughter, mitigating circumstances, how to cover up evidence of a crime, deleting surveillance footage, the timing of the inquiries, most after 8 p.m., which is presumably when she found out about her son's condition. What else? We found deleted emails in the email account. Adam wrote to his mother 7 days ago, 'Mom, there's something I have to tell you. It's going to change everything. Please don't tell Dad yet.' The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. If Emily found out about her son's relationship with Diane and the fact that she had infected him with HIV, it could be a powerful motive for murder. The final test was street surveillance footage from the neighborhood around Diane's house. One of them, located on a nearby street, showed a silver sedan, very similar to Emily's car, driving in the direction of Diana's house at 9:30 in the evening, around the time of the murder. The same car left the neighborhood at 10:45. Oddly, the footage from the camera in the driveway of Diane's own house during that period had been corrupted, as if someone had deliberately erased it. Valerie leaned back in her chair, analyzing the information she'd gathered. Everything pointed to Emily Blackwell: motive, opportunity, evidence. But more evidence was needed for definitive confirmation. She decided to talk to Emily again, now with more solid evidence in hand. It was going to be a difficult conversation with a woman whose world had just fallen apart. The morning of the third day of the investigation began for Valerie Stone with an impressive stack of reports waiting on her desk. The police department was buzzing like an awakened beehive, but her office was tensely quiet. "Coffee?" Sergeant Morris asked, peeking through the door. Valerie nodded, keeping her eyes on the Blackwell family's phone records. The last week of Adam's life had been marked by a flurry of calls, first to Dr. Coleman, then to his sister Olivia, and finally to his mother and father. The series of calls on the eve of the murder had been particularly remarkable. 4 to Diane, 2 to his mother, 1 to his father. All short, 1 to 3 minutes. What happened that day? "We have the results of Thomas Blackwell's alibi check." Morris put his cup on the table. He was indeed at a business dinner at the Aquamarine restaurant with clients. The waiters and the maitre d' confirmed it. Left there at 11:20. And Olivia? At the library until closing, then back to the dorms. Roommate confirms it. So that leaves Emily. Her alibi for the charity event only holds up until 9 p.m. Then there's a lapse of nearly 2 hours before she gets home. Valerie tapped her pen thoughtfully on the desk. "I need to have another conversation with Dr. Coleman and check to see if the security cameras at Diana's house were accessed from Emily's computer. She may have remotely erased the footage." Riverview Clinic looked as serene as it did 2 days ago. Dr. Coleman was waiting for Valerie in his office, his face expressing fatigue and anxiety. "I don't have much time, Detective. What brings you back?" "I want to go over the details of the conversation with Adam when you informed him of the diagnosis." Valerie sat down across from him. "You said he guessed the source of the infection. What exactly happened?" Coleman sighed heavily, took off his glasses and began wiping them with a handkerchief, a gesture that suggested nervousness. "I asked the standard questions about sexual contact, use of protection. Adam claimed to be extremely careful, having had only 2 partners in the last year, always using condoms. Then I asked if he had dated anyone who might have been HIV positive. The doctor fell silent, choosing his words. And then it literally hit him. You know, that moment of sudden realization when a person sees the whole picture. He turned pale, then red, his eyes filled with tears. He mumbled something like, 'God, no, not again,' and ran out of the office. Are you suggesting that he realized who might have infected him?" "Yes. Given his reaction, it was someone he didn't expect to betray him, if you will." "And you knew that Diane Blackwell had HIV?" "Of course I did. I was her primary care physician." "But you didn't connect the 2 facts?" Coleman swallowed, his face tense. "I did, but, You have to understand, detective, the idea of an aunt and a nephew. It was beyond my understanding of their relationship. I knew they were close, but something like that. He shook his head. When did you realize it was possible? When Adam called me late at night, hysterical. He was drunk, talking confused, but mentioned that he'd slept with a virus carrier he trusted. Given his limited social circle and the fact that Diane had HIV, I began to suspect, but I wasn't sure. Did you try to talk to Diana? Yes, the next day. She denied everything, said I was crazy, that it was slander. Did you tell anyone in the family? No, of course not. Doctor-patient confidentiality. But they could have found out some other way. Coleman thought about it. Emily had been coming in lately, complaining of stress, trouble sleeping. During her checkup, she'd seen Adam's medical records on the table and he faltered. God, she could see the test results. When was this? About 4 days before the murder. Valerie made a note of it, another piece of the puzzle. The next step was to meet Emily Blackwell at her home, a spacious 2-story mansion in an upscale neighborhood. The door was opened by Thomas, his face grim. Detective Stone, he nodded. Emily's in the living room. She's not in the best of health. Emily was sitting on the couch, clutching a picture of her son in her hands. She looked gaunt, her eyes red from crying. But Valerie noticed something else as well, the wariness, the fear in her gaze when Emily looked at her. Mrs. Blackwell, I need to ask you some questions, Valerie began. Alone, if possible. Thomas reluctantly left the room. I've been going over your phone records. Valerie sat down across from Emily. Adam called you several times the day before the murder. What did you talk about? Emily tensed, her fingers gripping the picture frame tighter. Nothing in particular. He asked when we were going out for family dinner. Strangely, the calls had been quite emotional, judging by their length. I don't remember the details. Emily looked away. The last few days have been a blur. Mrs. Blackwell, I know you found out about Adam's diagnosis when you visited Dr. Coleman. You saw his medical records. Emily flinched. For a moment, her mask of composure cracked. Yeah, that's not true. I didn't see anything. We have evidence that you looked up information about HIV on the internet after your doctor's appointment, and about the effects of sedatives, about ways to cover up a crime. That's absurd, Emily exclaimed, but her voice trembled. We also know about Adam's relationship with Diana. We have their letters, their photographs. Emily made a strange sound, something between a sob and a chuckle. Of course you have everything, she whispered. Of course you have everything, she whispered. She changed suddenly, as if she'd exhausted the last of her strength to resist. Her shoulders slumped, her face lifeless. Adam called me hysterical, she said quietly. Said his life was over, that he was sick, that he could never be normal. I demanded an explanation, and he told me everything about Diana, about their relationship, about her infecting him. What did you do? I couldn't believe it at first. It seemed impossible. Diana is his aunt. How could she? Emily's voice shook with anger. I called her, demanded an explanation. She denied everything, called Adam a liar, said he'd made it all up out of unhappy love for her, that he misunderstood her friendliness. And that's when you decided to confront her? Emily was silent for a long time. Too long. Yes, she said at last. I had to talk to her in person. I had to look her in the eye when she denied that she had ruined my son's life. That's when Morris called Valerie's office. We have the results of the audit of Diane Blackwell's finances, he reported. She's withdrawn about $50,000 in cash in the last month. And one more thing. We found a draft of a letter in her computer addressed to Thomas. She was going to tell him that she was leaving the country and asked him not to look for her. Interesting, Valerie said thoughtfully. Check Thomas and Emily's finances. I need to know if there have been any large cash withdrawals from their accounts. The next item was to talk to Olivia again. The girl met Valerie in her dorm room, looking even more exhausted than the last time they had met. Tell me more about Adam's condition in the last days before he died, Valerie asked. Olivia wrapped her arms around herself as if protecting herself from an invisible threat. He was in a terrible state. I caught him crying a couple times. He said everything was ruined, that he couldn't trust anyone anymore. Did he mention Diana? Not directly. But once, when I asked him what was wrong, he shouted, "Ask your favorite aunt what she did to me." I didn't understand then. I do now, Olivia sobbed. If I'd known sooner, maybe I could have helped. Did he talk about suicide? No, not exactly. But he did say the odd phrase, "Sometimes it's better when things just end." Did either of your parents know about his condition? Olivia wondered. Adam had called his mom a few times. She was concerned, asking me if I knew what was going on. Then suddenly she stopped asking, as if she already knew the answer. After talking to Olivia, Valerie received a new report from the tech department. Emily Blackwell's computer had indeed accessed the video surveillance system at Diana's house 2 hours before the alleged time of the murder. Someone was looking at the camera locations and angles. In addition, forensic analysis found microfibers of fabric on Diane's neck that matched the material of the gloves found in Emily's home. The gloves had been thoroughly washed, but microscopic traces of Adam's blood were still found. When Emily's car was re-examined, forensics found traces of Adam's blood in the trunk. Apparently, she had tried to wash them thoroughly, but was unable to destroy all traces. The final touch was the discovery in the shed behind the Blackwell house. A crystal figurine carefully wrapped in rags with traces of Adam's blood. Forensics confirmed that the shape and size matched the wound on the young man's head. It was the murder weapon. Valerie now had enough evidence to reconstruct the events of that fateful night. She gathered the remaining members of the Blackwell family, Thomas, Emily, and Olivia, in the living room of Diane's house. The crime scene was meant to increase the psychological pressure on the killer. "I've gathered you here to tell you what happened the night of the murder," Valerie began. The story began long before that, when Diana and Adam became romantically involved. Thomas let out a pained groan. Olivia cried quietly. Emily sat motionless, her face turned into a stone mask. Diana was HIV positive and knew it. Nevertheless, she had entered into a relationship with her 18-year-old nephew and had infected him as a result. Adam learned of his diagnosis a week before his death. He was desperate, calling his family, including his mother. Valerie looked at Emily. "That day," the detective continued, "one of you came here to talk to Diana. I believe it was you, Emily." Emily didn't react, continuing to stare at one point. "You knew the mode of operation of the surveillance cameras, since you had studied them before, using your technical skills. You arrived at Diana's house around 9:30 in the evening." Valerie pointed to the tea table. "Diana offered you tea, and you added a strong sedative from your lab to her cup." Valerie paused, watching Emily's reaction, but she remained impassive. "When the drug took effect and Diana lost consciousness, you smothered her with a pillow. But then, the unexpected happened. Adam arrived. He often visited his aunt unannounced. When he found you next to Diana's body, he was horrified. A struggle ensued, during which you grabbed the statue and struck him on the head." "No!" Emily suddenly exclaimed, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't mean to. He attacked me, screaming that I was a murderer. He was out of his mind. I was just defending myself." "Emily," Thomas whispered, his face contorted with horror. "You don't understand." Emily turned to her husband. "She destroyed him, infected our boy. His life was over. She deserved to die." "What happened next?" Valerie asked quietly. Emily was suddenly calm, her voice monotone, as if she were reading a story from a book. "I realized what I had done. My son. My boy was lying there, blood everywhere. I checked for a pulse. There was none." She closed her eyes. "I cleaned up as best I could, wrapped up the statue, put it in the trunk. Then I took a different route home to avoid the cameras. Why did you delete Diana's security footage? I didn't want anyone to see Adam come in. I didn't want the world to know about their, connection. I wanted to protect my son's memory." "Did you tell your husband?" Emily cast a quick glance at Thomas. "No, he didn't know anything. He thought Adam was in class late and then at a friend's house." "Thomas, you didn't discover your son's absence until the next morning?" "Yes," he answered hoarsely. "I figured he'd spent the night at a friend's house. It happened." Valerie nodded and turned to Emily. "Emily Blackwell, you are under arrest for the murder of Diane Blackwell and the manslaughter of Adam Blackwell." As the officers handcuffed Emily, she didn't resist. Her face became peaceful, almost calm. "You know, Detective," she said quietly, "if it were possible to go back, I would have done the same thing. She deserved to die for what she did to my boy. Mothers protect their children even if it's too late." Leaving the house, Valerie felt a strange emptiness. The case had been solved, the killer had confessed. The evidence was irrefutable. But there could be no happy ending here. 3 lives were cut short, Diana and Adam physically. Emily plunged into the darkness of revenge and murder. Thomas and Olivia remained, but their lives would never be the same again. As Valerie got into the car, it began to rain. Heavy drops smashing against the windshield, blurring the outline of the upscale suburb. This downpour couldn't wash away the traces of tragedy, but perhaps in time it would help the outcast souls find some semblance of peace. "Let's go," she said to the driver, casting one last glance at Diane Blackwell's house. There was nothing more to find here,